If you are arrogant, take a step back and ask, what is my arrogant behavior about? Am I feeling insecure in this situation? Do I feel the need to dominate other people so I feel safer? Am I marking my territory? Some people hold on to their arrogance because they notice that other people kind of snap into order in the face of it and they get things done. In today's video, I'm going to take on something I know more than a few of you have read about and probably thought about. So let's talk about it. How many of you have ever heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect? So what's this fancy effect all about? Have you ever worked with someone who is actually pretty unqualified or even downright incompetent, but they overestimate their ability level, like they really think that they are competent? Or you have a family member who thinks they're really good at something, but actually are not, but assert that they are. It's really difficult when you run into this dynamic at work, because the person who thinks that they are competent may be walking around, talking, behaving as though they really are qualified and competent, but are not. And frankly, that might mean that if you're working with them, you're having to work harder to make up for their failings or deal with the discomfort of knowing that they're being paid the same as you and they really don't know what they're doing. But goodness, they show up so confident and think that they're doing it right. And the fact is, if you did give them feedback, they would not take it well because they really do have a cognitive bias in which they believe they are actually competent. Interestingly, the most unqualified and most incompetent folks, the ones at the bottom, are the ones who overestimate their abilities the most and may actually be even more confident in their skills than someone who actually is more competent and more qualified. These people who are experiencing this so-called Dunning-Kruger effect may step up and act like they know what they're talking about, which means, for example, that if the management in your company is ignorant themselves or just simply not paying attention, that they may believe that the confident incompetent who is willing to step up and take the podium actually knows what they're talking about. Now, ironically, the flip side of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that people who really do know their stuff, really know it and find it easy to do, that they've mastered it, actually underestimate how difficult a task is. So there's not only the risk of these people at the very top underselling themselves, but also making the dangerous assumption that others can do the task as easily as them. Think of someone who's a magnificent cook. They cook like a chef, and they don't recognize that it doesn't come as easily to everyone else. So they almost devalue their own culinary skills. So there's not only what probably looks like a humility piece to this, but a person may also not fully recognize how hard the task is for others and may not offer proper support or be quite surprised when they can't do it. Now you may be thinking, isn't this every narcissistic person out there? Not necessarily. Some narcissistic people are actually very qualified and competent, so they aren't overestimating their abilities. But this pattern, especially the side of this where the side of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where a person who is unqualified and genuinely believes that they're able to do the task and do it well and talks like they do, all of that together is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. This effect is the work of two researchers at Cornell University who observed that people were doing this thing that they were studying in their experimental studies. And not only are they ignorant, they are ignorant that they are ignorant. Welcome to the internet, which is a bunch of ignorant people who don't know that they're ignorant. Now remember when this research was originally done, 1999, the internet was not the mess it is now. Now, lots of narcissistic folks have a Dunning-Kruger vibe. They can be unqualified and they're almost delusionally grandiose and think that they can do the task. Now, while all people in this Dunning-Kruger effect tend to do poorly with feedback because they genuinely believe that they're competent or they're right, a narcissistic Dunning-Kruger person would bite your hand off. Now, the Dunning-Kruger effect in a narcissistic person would be really magnified by the grandiosity, making it almost unchangeable. In a non-narcissistic Dunning-Kruger person, we are more likely seeing someone who doesn't have all of the information they know to recognize that they actually don't know, and they sort of live in their ignorant bubble. But they may not necessarily be grandiose, they just may simply not be able to appraise the situation accurately. Now, Dunning-Kruger people lack insight and they lack self-awareness. Now, these are also two patterns that we always see in narcissism. But there are some people out there where we see the Dunning-Kruger effect who actually might be empathic, well-regulated, even nice enough people, except for this one sort of hole in their vision. And because they lack insight, they don't know to ask for help or guidance when they need it, which again, if you're working with them, it makes your life much, much harder. Dunning-Kruger is personally a major pet peeve of mine. When I see incompetent folks walk around the world like they get things and they understand things, it wastes so much time and it can actually result in workplace gaslighting. If you are the one who has to work with the incompetent Dunning-Kruger person, you may become exhausted because many times everyone else has fallen for how confident this person is and how much they believe they can do it. Now, it's interesting to me that Dunning-Kruger is a recent theoretical model. It derives from existing social psychology sort of constructs like optimism bias. But I often wonder, are we in a world in which more and more we just tell people they're great to bolster their self-esteem when in fact they're not? I ran into people like that all the time when I was a professor, when I would have a student who gave me clearly a D-level paper, and then they would get upset telling me they were getting A's from their other professors. Now, the pendulum has swung probably too much from what it used to be. And the fact is, though, we should not be pumping up self-esteem, but we should be training self-awareness, especially in that bottom 25% who seem to think they are in the top 5%. Dunning-Kruger and narcissism are an interesting overlay. And I think that the lack of self-awareness and grandiosity and underestimate of their impact on others and overestimate of their abilities, that all means that narcissistic people never accurately judge themselves. But I think this may be separate from the Dunning-Kruger stuff. The narcissistic personality just doesn't have accurate self-appraisal. In my career, I've worked with plenty of Dunning-Kruger folks, and it felt a little gaslighty to work with them only because they just didn't get how unqualified they were and really believed they were, which would definitely put me in the uncomfortable position of trying to find a gentle way to tell them they didn't know what they were doing while also respecting HR guidelines. And even if you did, they still didn't get it. When you're in the presence of this sort of Dunning-Kruger effect person, you feel like you're losing your mind and you wonder if you are missing something. You aren't, and sadly, even after reading the literature on this, it doesn't seem there's much you can do. You can document, you can figure out workarounds, and hopefully find a way to never work with the person again. It's really awful. It's hard enough to work with narcissistic folks, but then if you were to add the sort of Dunning-Kruger group of people out there in addition to the narcissistic people, it's a wonder that any of us are able to remain sane at work. Listen, know your limitations. It may be the wisest thing anyone could ever do. Because if we think ignorant people are dangerous, the only thing more dangerous than ignorant people are ignorant people who don't know they're ignorant, or incompetent people who don't know they're incompetent, or unqualified people who don't know they're unqualified. Folks, that's the Dunning-Kruger effect, and while it kind of looks and smells and breathes like narcissism, it's not grandiosity. It's just sort of they really, really don't get it, and there are few things more maddening. Listen, arrogance is not a word that has positive connotations. In the best telling of the story, arrogance is associated with swagger and perhaps the assumptions that the person has the goods and that's why they're arrogant. But by and large, arrogance is all about domination. The idea that someone is better than someone else. Arrogance is sort of a complex stew of entitlement, inflated self-esteem, ego, and contempt. It's the idea of someone buying their own hype and taking that out into the world. Now, if you think that you are a narcissist and have this quality, just letting you know that most people are put off by arrogance. But interestingly, there are also a lot of people that cut arrogant folks a lot of slack. If you are arrogant, and let's say you're just sort of a closer, you get things done, or you are very good at something, or you are financially successful or powerful, people will make allowances for your arrogance, which means it's a quality that has moved forward a long ways for you, and now it's getting in the way, right? Arrogance is an antagonistic quality that puts the arrogant person at odds with most other people. I have often believed that excellence is defined as knowing what you are good at and not feeling the need to dominate others with that knowledge. But a healthily excellent person doesn't need to dominate, right? The narcissistic insecurity is what underlies the arrogance, a sort of puffing up of the feathers because the arrogant person deep down really doesn't believe that they're all that, so they just keep those feathers big and wide so people think they are all that. So you may be wondering, why don't people like your arrogance? It's because arrogance feels snobby and elitist, and it means that the only way for you to be up is to have other people be down and be below you. That doesn't feel good to other people. It can feel dismissive and contemptuous and really uncomfortable. If you are arrogant, take a step back and ask, what is my arrogant behavior about? Am I feeling insecure in this situation? Do I feel the need to dominate other people so I feel safer? Am I marking my territory? Some people hold on to their arrogance because they notice that other people kind of snap into order in the face of it and they get things done. But over time, I promise you this, your arrogance is wearing them out. They aren't thinking, oh, I'm so lucky to be here working with an arrogant person. They're exhausted. They may be hustling because you're really good at what you do. But over time, the anger and the contempt is definitely taking a toll on them. So if indeed you are interested in addressing your narcissism, what can you do to push back on your arrogance? Number one, think about how your words and behavior impact other people. If you walk around saying you are all that, and also you're being dismissive of other people with whom maybe you're competing for something, it's really off-putting. And that takes us back to an earlier video in this series on empathy and why it's so important. You have to care about how your words and behavior impact other people if indeed you really want to push back on your narcissism. If that's what you want to do, you got to be able to do that. But if you really are making a good faith attempt to be better and get it right, then you need to reflect on your arrogance and how it does, in fact, affect other people. Number two, you gotta work on your own insecurity. Arrogance is almost always a byproduct of insecurity. The need to puff yourself up to look better and to be able to dominate other people. So this is going to relate to the recommendation I've made in all of these videos about getting therapy to get to the root causes of this insecurity. More often than not, arrogance is a defensive maneuver that's designed to help a person feel safer and more powerful, even as it frustrates and maybe even hurts other people. Number three, you got to get more clear, authentically clear on your goals for you. Sometimes arrogance comes from a place of wanting to be the very best, as though there isn't room for any other competitors to stand alongside you, or even different opinions or voices. For many narcissistic people, goal setting is very much about what they believe will look good to the world, rather than what they really want. Part of the deeper dive work on pushing past narcissism is figuring out what it is you really want and what you are really about. Arrogance can be about wanting to be dominant for dominance sake, to be the top, the best, and feel safe. If you are more clear on what it is you really want, what it is you stand for, and who you are, that in and of itself is an important step to not just addressing arrogance, but also narcissism. Number 4, you can't forget culture. You may have come out of a swagger culture. Those can include athletic cultures, other elite performative spaces, highly competitive work environments, or even highly competitive educational environments, or even military environments. And sometimes that can bleed into life. Remember, for example, on the sports field or in some other truly competitive arena, the arrogance may come out as psyching out an opponent. And that may work on the basketball court or the soccer pitch, but you gotta learn your arenas. The arrogance that may work for you on the sports field or in the boardroom is not going to feel good to the people you work with or are in close relationships with. You know, when it comes down to it, arrogance is one of those sort of core narcissism 101 kind of characteristics. Sometimes arrogance comes out as straight up arrogance. I'm better than you, that kind of thing. Sometimes, though, it comes out as vulnerable, covert stuff like, I can't be bothered to do these stupid requirements. I'm too good to be wasting my time on this. Whether it is arrogance is vulnerable or grandiose, I can promise you, none of it feels good to other people. Knowing that you're good, and we all are, at something, and not feeling the need to use it to overpower other people is actually what a show of strength is. But to do that requires an internal sense of security. Getting some of the arrogance out of the way, if you're trying to work on your narcissism, can really facilitate better close relationships with other people. If you really, really do want to address your narcissistic patterns and get them out of the way a little bit, I got to tell you, for just about every person out there who is narcissistic, amongst one of the first things they do need to address is their arrogance.
Entitlement is the expectation that one is entitled to some form of special treatment or special benefit just because they're them. They feel like they shouldn't have to wait in lines, they shouldn't have to pay the same amount, they shouldn't be told no, they shouldn't have to go through all the headaches the rest of us have to go through in regular life. They believe the rules are for other people and that they do not need to follow them if they don't want to. Entitlement is one of those sort of key pillars, if you will, of narcissism. It's one of its defining characteristics. I don't think I've ever met or worked with a narcissist who's not entitled. They expect that, for example, they could stroll late into a doctor's office half an hour late, and that they shouldn't have to wait and be seen right on time. An example of being what it would be like to be with a narcissist who's being deeply entitled. You walk into a restaurant on a crowded Saturday night. There's lots of people milling around waiting for tables. The narcissist sort of barrels over to the host station and says, "Yep, we're here, we'd like a table." 8 o'clock. And the person working that station says, "Yeah, you know, it's probably going to be at least an hour, hour and a half." And this person, the narcissist, who's very entitled, will say, "Yeah, no, I don't wait an hour and a half. Let's make this happen. Come on, I know the guy who owns this place, okay? Just go ahead and get me seated. I don't even have time for this. Like, seriously? Like, find my table. I'm not these people. Like, please. I know the guy." They always know the guy, by the way. I know the guy. And they expect that all these other people who have been waiting an hour, they don't value their time, they don't care, back to the lack of empathy, and that they're somehow so special, they shouldn't have to wait. Think about other people. These are people who will do, for example, they'll think like, "Yeah, my kid should be at the head of the line. Don't care about anyone else's kid." This is the person who in a workplace will say, "Yeah, don't care that everyone else gets furloughed, but I shouldn't have to get furloughed." They truly believe that they are above the rules, above the laws, above anything. Entitlement has sadly, on a societal level, become a sort of a new normal. And as sort of the world switches over to a much more narcissistic focus, the world also becomes entitled. It's as though nobody feels that they should have to wait in line, which can make lines very, very troubling places. I'm sure many of you have thought of times when you have been in a long line and people are yelling and screaming, I can't believe I have to wait in this line, and don't you know who I am? Why am I waiting in this line? I'm really important. My time is very valuable. These are sort of the mantras of the narcissist. They really scream and yell about their entitlement and why they should not be subjected to rules in the same way. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist who's entitled, it can actually be really embarrassing. When you're out in public and they're doing things like going into the restaurant and saying, why should I have to wait in line? Or believing that, their child shouldn't have to wait in a doctor's office, or that they shouldn't have to wait in a doctor's office, or that somehow everyone else had to pay a special change fee and they shouldn't have to. I actually travel a lot, so I get to see entitlement all the time when I travel. People wandering onto airplanes where they've just paid the regular fare and saying, I should be in a first class seat, or I should have a better seat than anybody else, or people who are in hotels saying, I should get a suite, even though they've paid sort of the regular rate. So they really do walk into places believing the rules shouldn't apply to them, and sadly, they often get rewarded for this entitled behavior, because they will often bully people to the point where they do give them the better hotel room. They may move them to the better seat. They may move them up in line. And they may seat them in the restaurant. I was recently working with a hairdresser who was telling me about working in a really high-end neighborhood where she had a lot of very entitled clients. And she was talking about how there was one woman who would always come in, and if she wasn't seen precisely on time, she would make such a fuss. But guess what happened? This woman always got seen in time, and a lot of the other people were made to wait longer. So in that way, we reward entitled narcissistic people and give them what they want, honestly, just to shut them up. But because they don't have any empathy, they don't recognize that that's why this is being done. They're like, oh, well, of course I got this, because I am, in fact, more important. Entitlement is one of those qualities that not only hurts us as individuals in a relationship, it hurts all of us. Because what it does is it makes systems just work less effectively. So entitlement's one of those things that probably all of us face on a daily basis. It is very much a signature move of a narcissist. Narcissists are masterful at getting what they want. Let me give you an example of one of the classic stories I've actually heard more than a few times of how narcissists manipulate other people. They're really good at telling sad stories about themselves so that they can get away with their bad behavior. So you might have a narcissist who's prone to rage and yelling and cheating and all kinds of bad behavior. And when their partner finally calls them out and says, you're a jerk. You're a real jerk. And I don't like this anymore. I don't want to be in this anymore. The narcissist will then start saying, oh, my dad was so mean to me, and my mom was so mean to me, and my teacher was so mean to me, and everybody bullied me. And they'll go and give this really, it may even be true, honestly, it may even be a true, heartfelt story. And then you'll feel terribly guilty for having brought that up and saying, oh my gosh, this person's been through so much. Of course he's angry. I'd be angry too. And before you know it, you're making excuses for his or her behavior. The narcissist's sort of ability to work a situation. We're going to be talking about gaslighting during the 30 days of narcissism, which is also another tool of manipulation. They're able to tell a story. They're able to paint themselves as a victim so much better than anybody else. They may actually say, I've worked my whole life for a dream, and one day I'm going to reach that dream. Now we're back to the grandiosity. And when I do, I'll have made enough money to take care of both of us. So do you mind working 2 jobs so I can focus on my dream of becoming a musician or something else like that may not be likely to pay? Please, will you hold these 2 jobs, and then when I make it, we're going to be living on Easy Street. Let me tell you how this story is going to go down. They will manipulate you in that way. I should be supporting his dream, and after all, we're in this together, aren't we? And you'll work your 2 jobs, morning and night. And he or she will pretend to be a musician or whatever sort of grandiose flight of fancy they're using all this time to do. You'll come home to a messy house. You'll come home to things not done. You'll keep working your 2 jobs. And then 20 years later, you're going to realize like not one song was sung and you worked yourself to the bone. Or better yet, their manipulation can even take the turn that you will have done all of that. They will have made it and then they're going to leave, because that's how a narcissist rolls. When you have a parent who's manipulative, it's very much about manipulating emotion. Like, well, we did put you through college. However, we also understand that, maybe you don't want to come home, and it can feel sort of like a passive aggressive maneuver. But when it comes down to it, you can often feel very played by your parents. And I think that's the key here. It's sort of a red flag to pay attention to, is when you're interacting with someone and you feel played by them. Like, was I just duped? Like, what just happened? Why am I doing all of this? Why am I jumping through all of these hoops? You've probably been manipulated. For narcissists, it comes naturally. It's like I've always said, they very much view people as objects. And when people are objects, no different than a spoon or a cup or a car or a suitcase, these things all serve a function for us. For narcissists, people are like those things. They serve functions. And if they serve functions, a narcissist probably doesn't even think of it as manipulation. They probably just view it as, I'm just using this thing for what it was made for. It can feel really awful, really upsetting, and really sort of soul destroying to believe and know you were manipulated. It's part of the territory, sadly, with a narcissist. First of all, let's talk about what greedy is. To be greedy in some ways is to be covetous, to want more than what you probably need, and oftentimes to want more than what other people have. Greed means wanting and needing more than anyone actually does need. More food than you need, more money than you need. It's a very, what we call an acquisitive stance. And so in that way, greed means nothing is ever enough. And right there, that's the narcissist paradox. Nothing is enough, and that's because of the emptiness they feel inside. It's an emptiness they typically try to fill with stuff, power, money, experiences, but they're always trying to fill the hole. The idea is if you fill it enough, then you won't have to feel that sense of narcissistic emptiness that can actually be experienced as pretty awful by anybody who is narcissistic and make them very agitated and angry. Because narcissists are so greedy, they'll stop at nothing oftentimes to get what they want. They'll often go out of their way to make sure they enter professions that are very profitable. When we think about covert narcissists, for example, those vulnerable narcissists that always feel like victims and woe is me, if they can't get enough stuff, they can't fill that greedy need, they can get really, really angry and agitated. But it's for this reason that narcissists are pretty money hungry. Because as far as they're concerned, if they have enough money, then they can get the stuff, they can get the power, they can get the whole patina that makes it seem that finally everyone wants to be them, everyone envies them, and so then they win. So this greediness, though, can be about things other than money. They can also be very greedy about time. They'll want more of others' time than they'll ever be willing to give up. They'll want more than other people have. They're the kind of people who will think nothing. It'll be silly things. Like they'll sit in a chair and put their bag on the chair next to them, even though there's clearly not enough chairs for everyone to sit in. So greed in some ways plays on the entitlement and the grandiosity of narcissism and really derives from those places. I should be getting everything, and I'm so great, I deserve everything. People can really be put off by the narcissist's greed. It can make it feel like they're really awful people to get into business dealings with. It can feel kind of gross when you're in a relationship with them and they're either bragging about what they have or coveting what other people have or being very competitive to get what people have. And it's very much, it's all about the winning for them and then showing it off when they get it. Greed is one of those qualities that's actually been labeled as one of the 7 deadly sins. So obviously, it's not one of those things we as a society value as a virtue. But strangely, greed is something we as a culture have incentivized. Many of you as subscribers and viewers to this are not old enough to remember a film from the 1980s called Wall Street. It was an Oliver Stone film. But there was an iconic line in that film. Michael Douglas plays the ruthless Wall Street trader. And then again, iconic line that maybe you've seen that is him walking with his circa 1980s slick back hair and his suspenders saying, "Greed is good." That motto, "Greed is good," became the motto of the 1980s. But in fact, it's probably more true in the 2010s that we find ourselves in. There's nothing wrong with wanting to work hard and earn a sense of security through ensuring you have enough money in the bank, through wanting to have a home, a car, and the basic nice things you want. But greed is when that drive overtakes a person. It overtakes them so much that they lose sight of other people, they lose sight of what's important in human relationships, they lose sight of ethics, they lose sight of what is considered appropriate and respectful social interaction. For them, it's always about the win, it's about the stuff, it's about the getting the stuff, and oftentimes it's about showing off the stuff. Greed is one of those characteristics, sadly, that in more than a few fields it might get you ahead, but I can promise you the one place greed won't get anyone ahead is in close relationships. It's a very unhealthy characteristic to bring into an intimate partnership, and in that way it often makes a relationship with a narcissist of any kind, whether family, friend, or partner, a very, very difficult space. Lying never feels good, no matter who's lying to you. And the fact is, it's one of those patterns we all often engage in. We tell white lies. We lie to give a reason for why we're late, or why we may not come to work on a certain day, or why we're canceling dinner plans. Any of those kinds of sorts of white lie situations, or even when we tell somebody they look good in that dress. They're all white lies, and they're often meant to sort of save face, maybe not hurt someone's feelings. And as long as they're not situations where you're perpetrating a fraud or really deceiving someone, and it's not a habit, I think we build in some margin for error there. That's not the kind of lying, though, we're talking about here. People who are narcissistic are often very, very deceitful and very prone to lying. Once again, it lines up with their tendency to need to protect their insecurity and their fragile ego and their fragile self-esteem. So they'll lie to prop themselves up. They'll lie to look better. They'll lie to be able to engage in denial and to protect themselves from guilt and shame. So lying serves lots and lots of functions for a narcissistic person. But if you're on the receiving end of those lies, and especially if they are pattern and habitual, it can really, really take a toll on you. Obviously on the relationship, because it's so characterized by mistrust. And that kind of mistrust, if you're experiencing it, can start to extend to other relationships in your life. If one person lies to you a lot, it becomes difficult to start trusting anybody. So this can get really complicated if you grow up with a parent who lies to you a lot. They can lie to you about big stuff, small stuff, but when a parent lies to you, it can really be devastating because that's often your sort of true north. It's where you get your moral core. So if parents are lying, it can really, really make the world like it's really built on really unstable soil. The narcissist's tendency to lie often lines up with other qualities, like, for example, their lack of empathy. They don't stop to think that lying to someone can really hurt them in a very fundamental way. Since they're not connected to your emotional world, they really only look at the function that the lying has for them themselves, rather than the hurt it could cause someone else. They'll lie because of their entitlement, almost like they feel like they can lie. They don't have to tell the truth. Why should they have to? Because they do think they're sort of special and deserve special treatment. Sometimes the lying gets them that special treatment. They lie quite a bit because they engage in denial. It's really, really hard for them to sort of accept certain truths in their lives. So they will just lie to almost protect themselves from that. And they'll sometimes even lie as a way of just sort of denying their own histories. They'll make up sort of half-truths about where they come from, what they're about. And in fact, when we get into full-blown psychopathy or really, really severe malignant narcissism, lying is part of the whole game. That's why they're often successful as con men. They'll make up aliases. They'll tell stories about their histories that aren't true to get access, to get privilege, to get things that they don't deserve. They'll even lie about having gone to college to get a job. So it really depends on how malignant the narcissism is, or whether we veered into psychopathy, to really get to how bad this lying can be. The lying can even culminate in things like legal issues. And while lying per se is not against the law, if you lie under oath or you lie about business matters or contracts, yeah, you run afoul of the law. And that's often a place where narcissists find themselves. But in an interpersonal relationship, it may not even be the big ticket stuff. It's the day after day, lying about where they've been, lying about how they're spending money, lying about other things like, are they looking for a job, or, lying about something that they're going to do in the future with you. They make false promises, which can also feel like a lie. And those day after day lies can really erode you in a relationship and fill you with anxiety, self-doubt, and just plain interpersonal exhaustion. So being in a relationship with a narcissist almost inevitably results in pretty consistent lying and hearing lies on a day in and day out basis. In the workplace, it's also really rough because there can be lies about where a job is going, bonuses, salaries, promises may be made, and they may even say, hey, let's just shake on that. We don't need a contract. And then they lie about that too. So the consequences can be quite devastating in those situations. So lying is one of those things that gets built in. And in fact, for many people, it's the lying that often tells them that there's something not right in this relationship I'm having with this person, and is often one of the first red flags that they notice that somebody may have the patterns of narcissism. So pay attention to that pattern. Not every liar is a narcissist. People lie for a variety of reasons. You'll often see sometimes teenagers lie, and it's that sort of lying is often a pattern in adolescence. It's that if it becomes pathological, problematic, or is causing problems for the teen themselves or in the future, that we might pay more attention to it, especially if it culminates into adulthood. So lying, it hurts people when it happens enough. And it's a really bad habit to get into. If it's happening in your relationship, pay attention to it. It could be a really important red flag of narcissism. Those of you who are enduring relationships with narcissists know that lying is part of the territory. How do you manage it? Part of it is that you start, sadly, having to really view everything with some suspicion. It may mean very carefully documenting things on your end, not putting too much trust into them. So for example, if they're a liar, you may not want to put your financial wherewithal into their hands. You're going to want to make sure you dot your own I's and cross your own T's and do your homework. It's a really exhausting way to get through life. Thanks again for tuning in.